Nestled in the mountains of western Massachusetts, the Hoosac Tunnel stands as one of the most remarkable feats of 19th century engineering. Stretching nearly 5 miles through the Hoosac Mountain, the tunnel earned the nickname the Bloody Pit for the numerous tragedies that occurred during its construction. The history of the Hoosac Tunnel is not only a testament to human ingenuity, but perseverance. And it's also a tale shrouded in mystery, with many ghost stories and legends still whispered among locals today. The story of the Hoosac Tunnel began in the early 19th century, as industrialization swept through New England. By the 1840s, the growing need for efficient transportation routes across the rugged Berkshires in western Massachusetts became apparent. The region's mountainous terrain made overland travel slow and difficult, limiting the economic potential of western Massachusetts. Visionaries and engineers proposed a solution that was audacious for the time, and that was a tunnel through the Hoosac Mountain that would connect the growing industrial cities of Massachusetts, like Boston, to the Erie Canal and the rest of the western United States. The idea for the Hoosac Tunnel was first conceived by Alva Crocker, who was a Massachusetts businessman and politician in the 1840s. Crocker believed that a tunnel would be the key to unlocking the economic potential of the region. After a lot of debate, the Massachusetts General Court approved funding for the project in 1851. But from the beginning, the construction of the Hoosac Tunnel faced enormous challenges. Think about it. In that era, it was before modern drilling technology, so workers had to rely mainly on hand tools, black powder, and the newly invented nitroglycerin to blast through solid rock. And the progress would be slow and arduous, tunneling through schist, granite, and other rock formations. After numerous difficulties and delays, the original contractor, Herman Haupt, was terminated in 1856, and the state took over the project. Luckily or unluckily, the project took so long to work on that in the 1860s, there had been new inventions and new technology to help make the process a little bit easier. The introduction of pneumatic drills and later the use of compressed air to ventilate the tunnel marked the beginning of a new phase in construction. These technological advancements brought new dangers, though. Nitroglycerin, which is a volatile explosive, was used extensively during construction, and although it allowed for faster drilling, it also led to tragic accidents. And possibly the most famous one is in 1867, when an explosion killed 13 workers when nitroglycerin detonated prematurely. Over the course of the construction of the tunnel, nearly 200 men lost their lives due to cave-ins, explosions, and other accidents. These tragedies led to the Hoosac Tunnel's ominous moniker of the Bloody Pit. In all, it took nearly 25 years to create the Hoosac Tunnel. It was finally completed on November 27, 1874, stretching 4.75 miles. At the time, it was the longest tunnel in North America and second longest in the world. After the tunnel's completion, it did open up avenues for trade, linking Boston to the west and allowing for more efficient transportation of goods over land. But the tunnel's history of tragedy and death left an indelible mark on the region. As much as the Hoosac Tunnel is known for helping open up shipping routes for New England and the Northeast in general, it's known as much or maybe even more for being purported to be the most haunted spot in Massachusetts. Tales of hauntings have persisted for well over a century. One of the most famous ghost stories associated with the Hoosac Tunnel is the tale of the ghost miners. According to local lore, after the explosion in 1867 that killed 13 workers, strange occurrences began to happen in the tunnel. Other workers reported seeing full-body apparitions of men carrying lanterns, hearing eerie voices, and the sound of footsteps echoing in the darkness. In one account, a crew of workers entered the tunnel to begin their shift, but were suddenly overwhelmed by an inexplicable feeling of dread. They claimed to see shadowy figures moving in the darkness, and some even heard whispers urging them to leave. And terrified, the workers did. They fled the tunnel, refused to come back. They were convinced the spirits of their deceased colleagues were now haunting the site. There's been more paranormal occurrences that have been reported over the years, including the sighting of a ghostly man dressed in old-fashioned clothing near the entrance of the tunnel. Some visitors have reported hearing distant sounds of pickaxes and hammers. In the 1970s, a paranormal investigation team explored the Hoosac Tunnel and recorded unusual electromagnetic disturbances, temperature fluctuations. And naturally, skeptics argue that the tunnel's dark and eerie atmosphere can easily play tricks on the mind. When you think about it, if you wanted to go to the dead center of the Hoosac Tunnel, you're looking at almost 2.5 miles in the complete darkness. So it would be easy to see how creepy that would be. So that's kind of a brief overview of the history of the Hoosac Tunnel and some of the hauntings. I went there a little over a month ago. As I said, it was on my morbid bucket list. To get to the Hoosac Tunnel, you drive along the Mohawk Trail. At least that's the way I did it. And if you're heading east on the Mohawk Trail, you have to take a left and drive down. It's a very, very steep decline and somewhat winding. I would not recommend trying it in the colder months just in case there's ice. I was shocked at how much of a decline it was to get down to the road that leads you to the tunnel. One thing to remember if you go to check out the Hoosac Tunnel, it is an active railroad line. This is not an abandoned tunnel. And there's a sign that says no trespassing, but most people don't listen. I haven't heard any stories about people being arrested or hit by trains. When I got to the entrance to the tunnel, there's a little gravel parking area along the railroad tracks. And maybe 100 yards away, the railroad tracks go over Tunnel Brook. And it's another 50 to 75 feet down to the water from there. When I got there, I was shooting some video, just B-roll footage, they call it, for an eventual video about the Hoosac Tunnel. And it was awesome. The atmosphere is very much what you'd expect. It was kind of quiet, very creepy, even outside of it, especially if you go to the Hoosac Tunnel kind of knowing the story behind it. I was surprised by how many people were there. There weren't hundreds of people, but there was half a dozen. Some people were at the mouth of the tunnel, which is this imposing tunnel, kind of granite stone face with the year it was completed on it. This day that I went there, it was cloudy, it was starting to rain. There were a few people leaving the tunnel, going to their cars to drive away, but I saw two men, probably early 70s, and one of them was a local and an expert on the Hoosac Tunnel and kind of places to go around, because you can hike up behind the tunnel, up and over it, and there's a couple of waterfalls. I did not go up there because once it started to rain, I said, I want to go in the tunnel. I don't want to waste my time climbing over it and getting my clothes soaked. The guy that was the expert on the tunnel, he gave me some tips, and some of them were pretty ominous. Because it's an active rail line, he was telling me what to expect if I saw the light of a train coming. He said it would appear in front of you as kind of a pinhole light, and it would basically stay that size for a little while as the train slowly came up this incline from the other end. He also said if I was very deep in the tunnel and a train was coming and I didn't have the time to run out the other end, he said, don't worry, there's enough room on either side if you need to press yourself against the wall. The first thing I did was I hiked into the tunnel with just my phone. I took a few long exposure photos. I shot a video of me inside the tunnel just talking as I walked in.
All right, so I'm deep in here in the Hoosac Tunnel, and it's dripping water on me, and it's an active railroad line, and it's purported to be haunted. I can't see much, but I hear a lot. Dripping and splashing. I don't know how much further I'm going to go in. I'm about 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet in. That's why all you see is dark. Hear the noise though? All right, that's good.
So there's that clip. I mean, you'd have to envision it in your mind. I went in total a little over 1,000 feet. Within the first 30, 40 feet of going into this tunnel, it's pretty dark. The photos I have, it's so creepy looking, the inside of this tunnel. It looks like the inside of a monster, like a throat. It's the only way I can describe it. It's not smooth sides on this tunnel. You can see that it was dug mostly by hand. I realized that I was smart enough to bring my tripod with me on this road trip that I did. So I went back out to my car, grabbed my tripod, brought my regular camera with me, and hiked my way back in.
All right, so we're deeper in now. I'm getting dripped on with water. There's a few hikers behind me a few hundred yards. I know you can't see anything. Believe me, I'm deep in here. All right, I'm going to try to get some flash photos.
A funny part of this trip into the Hoosac tunnel was the fact that I was doing long exposure photos with my camera. I have a remote shutter. I plug it into the side of the camera so I can open up the shutter and just let it soak up the light and do a long exposure of as long as I want. I needed my camera to focus on something, so I held my phone in front of it with the flashlight on it so the camera would focus on that light. The funny thing is, the first time that I took a long exposure photo, I had gotten the camera to focus, but I hadn't been smart enough to step back. Later on, when I was looking at my photos, the very first long exposure photo on the right side is this ghostly apparition. And when I looked closer, I realized it was my face looking at the camera. Oh man, it's so funny. At first, I'm like, oh my God, I got a picture of a ghost. And then I'm like, wait, I know that face. The water was dripping all over the place due to the rain, so it was making noise when it would land on things that weren't dirt. There was debris in there. It's not a mess. It's just there's things on the edges of the tunnels, maybe from other people that have hiked in there. So you'd get these creepy sounds, and I just remind myself it's just the water dripping. By this point, I'm the deepest I went in there, so a little over 1,000 feet if I had to guess. I set up for a long exposure photo, and this one I wanted to be long. I'm talking 2.5 minutes to really light up the tunnel. I was smart. I was standing behind the camera, holding the remote shutter down and watching the timer tick away on the camera. And when I went to press the button again to close the shutter, the timer wouldn't stop. And I'm pressing it. I'm like, why is this not working? Then I'm pressing the actual button on my camera to try to make the shutter close. So in my mind, I'm like, oh man, there's some sort of paranormal activity. It won't let my camera shut off. Finally, I just shut the camera off manually, so I lost the photo, which sucked. Then I felt around on the camera and realized the water had dripped where I plug in the remote shutter. So it basically had disconnected the remote shutter. The camera was fine, but I ended up having to retreat because the water was dripping enough. I was like, I can't risk destroying my camera in the off chance that I get some great photo. Still, that lost 2.5 minute long exposure photo and deep in the Hoosac tunnel, it's given me reason to go back there. My plan is to, at some point, maybe in the spring, go back with a real flashlight, maybe an umbrella for my camera, and hike a little deeper in there. Because when you get in there and it's dark, it tightens your chest up. I was all gung-ho. My mother said you should ask questions while you're recording. And then when you get back, you listen to it in your headphones and see if something answered you. I was too scared to ask questions because I was afraid I was going to get answers. All in all, it was a super fun trip. Definitely creepy at times. I got a few good photos. If you're planning on going out to Western Massachusetts to go to the Hoosac Tunnel, just be careful. That's the main thing. Remember, it's an active rail line. But also remember, the lights that you see coming at you from deep in the tunnel might not be a train. It could be lanterns from long dead construction workers. There is a reason why the Hoosac Tunnel has the nickname the Bloody Pit.